The night was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on a neighborhood and makes even the faintest sound echo louder than it should. By morning, that silence was broken, not by birdsong or children playing, but by whispers spreading from house to house. The millionaire's pregnant wife had vanished. One moment she was there, glowing in her final trimester, taking her evening walk around the manicured garden, and the next, she was gone. No note. No suitcase. No explanation. Neighbors recalled the last time they had seen her. Mrs. Carter, who lived across the street, remembered waving as the young woman lingered outside the gate just before dusk. She looked troubled, she later told reporters. Her hand was on her belly, and her eyes seemed far away, like she was carrying more than just the weight of her child. Another neighbor swore he heard raised voices coming from the mansion late that evening, a man's tone sharp and cutting, followed by a door slamming so hard it rattled the still air. By the next day, the entire community buzzed with speculation. Media vans swarmed the street, cameras pointed at the massive gates of the estate. Headlines screamed across every screen and newspaper: pregnant socialite missing, foul play suspected? Tabloids dissected every aspect of her life, her marriage to the charming millionaire, her lavish lifestyle, her apparent happiness. But behind the glossy photographs, they began hinting at cracks. Rumors of a troubled marriage, whispers of betrayal, and questions no one dared ask aloud. Detectives arrived and combed through the property, but their questions only added to the mystery. Had she run away, overwhelmed by betrayal and despair? Or had she been silenced, her disappearance a carefully crafted cover-up designed to protect her husband's empire and secrets? The city was divided. Some believed she had finally snapped, leaving everything behind to escape the suffocating marriage. Others insisted she would never abandon her unborn child, that something darker lurked behind the gilded gates. One chilling truth hung heavy in the air: a pregnant woman does not simply vanish into thin air. And yet, she had. To the outside world, their life looked flawless, almost like a fairy tale written for glossy magazines and society columns. He was the millionaire husband, young, handsome, and impossibly successful. His empire stretched across real estate, technology ventures, and luxury investments, making him a fixture in financial news as much as in high society galas. He was photographed in tailored suits, flashing a practiced smile that radiated confidence. To the city, he was a symbol of ambition fulfilled, the man who seemed to have everything. At his side was his wife, adored by the public almost as much as he was. She was elegant yet approachable, a woman whose quiet grace charmed everyone who met her. Now heavily pregnant, she was often captured on camera resting a protective hand on her growing belly, glowing under the warm lights of charity dinners and foundation launches. Her devotion to her husband was celebrated, her patience admired, her loyalty unquestioned. When they stood together at events, people whispered about how perfect they looked, the golden couple who appeared untouchable. Their world was built of luxury and spectacle. The mansion with towering gates, the fleet of foreign cars gleaming in the driveway, the private jet that carried them to vacation homes scattered across Europe and the Mediterranean. Dinner parties in their home were legendary, drawing in politicians, celebrities, and CEOs, each eager to bask in the atmosphere of wealth and refinement. Magazines gushed about her designer gowns, his impeccable taste, their radiant smiles. Together, they embodied the kind of life most could only dream of. But perfection is fragile, and beneath the surface were cracks invisible to the camera's flashbulbs. Behind the walls of their mansion, the marriage was strained. Friends noticed her smile didn't always reach her eyes, that sometimes she appeared distracted, as if weighed down by something unspoken. Gossip, though quiet, began to ripple among staff and acquaintances. Whispers of his late-night absences, his abrupt mood swings, his secretive phone calls. She, ever composed in public, seemed to be carrying more than her unborn child, perhaps the heavy burden of doubt. Still, no one suspected how deep the fissures ran. To the world, they remained the embodiment of love and wealth, untouched by ordinary troubles. It was this illusion, the perfect life, that made her disappearance all the more shocking. After all, how could someone living a dream so enviable simply vanish without warning? The announcement came casually, almost too casually, over breakfast one crisp morning. He told her he had to leave for a business trip, nothing unusual, just another overseas meeting that demanded his personal attention. He spoke between sips of coffee, eyes fixed on his phone rather than on her. She forced a smile, nodding as though she had grown used to these absences. After all, business was what built the empire they lived in, what paid for the mansion, the luxury cars, the diamond-studded nursery waiting for their child. Yet something in his tone unsettled her. It was clipped, rushed, as though rehearsed. At first, she pushed away her unease, convincing herself it was just her pregnancy hormones making her sensitive. But the signs began piling up, impossible to ignore. His suitcase, packed days earlier, contained not files or documents but pressed linen shirts and leisure clothes. The company driver, who normally dropped him at the airport, was dismissed in favor of a private car she had never seen before. He grew secretive, setting his phone face down during meals, stepping outside to take hushed calls late into the night. She overheard fragments, soft laughter, promises, words that felt too intimate to be meant for business associates. Her instincts screamed louder with each passing day. Credit card statements revealed charges at boutiques she had never visited, jewelry stores she had never stepped into, all dated close to his supposed departure. There were also hotel reservations under a false name, conveniently overlapping with his meetings. She began piecing it together like a puzzle with no missing parts. The business trip was a lie. Confrontation hovered on her lips. But he carried himself with such confidence, such dismissive charm, that she second-guessed herself. Whenever she hinted at the irregularities, he would brush her off with a sharp laugh. "You're imagining things," he told her, stroking her arm like one soothes a restless child. "You know how much stress I'm under. Don't create problems that don't exist." But she could feel the emotional distance growing wider, as if a chasm had opened between them. Nights he once spent beside her were now swallowed by unexplained errands. The warmth in his gaze had cooled into something perfunctory. She could no longer ignore it. The man who promised her forever was hiding something dangerous behind the veil of business. And soon, she would uncover exactly what it was. It began with a slip, something so small he never noticed. She had been tidying his study, straightening the pile of papers he always left scattered across his desk, when a receipt caught her eye. It wasn't for a meeting venue or a business lunch. It was for a luxury hotel suite booked under his name, complete with champagne service and dinner for two. Her heart pounded as she stared at the printed details, her hand trembling as she slipped it into her robe pocket before he returned. It was the first undeniable crack in his carefully constructed lie. Once suspicion rooted itself, everything else began to fall into place. She checked his emails when he left his laptop open by mistake, and there it was, a chain of messages written with an intimacy that stabbed her to the core. Phrases like, "Can't wait to see you," and "Last night was unforgettable," leapt off the screen. She clicked through photo attachments only to find images of him with another woman, arms draped around each other in ways a husband reserves for his wife. The woman was younger, glamorous, and unmistakably positioned at his side as more than just an assistant. Her breath caught in her chest as the truth settled in. He hadn't gone on a business trip. He had gone on a getaway, parading another woman through luxury hotels and beach resorts while she sat at home, heavy with their child. The betrayal seared through her like fire, not just because of his infidelity, but because of the cruelty, how he had abandoned her during her most vulnerable moment, leaving her to fend for herself emotionally while he indulged elsewhere. When she confronted him, the argument was volcanic. She held up the receipts, the emails, the photos, demanding answers. His face hardened, then twisted into a mask of cold fury. Instead of apologies, he offered denial. "You're paranoid," he spat, his voice sharp enough to cut. "You're losing your mind. Do you want people to think you're hysterical?" He turned the blame on her, gaslighting her until her confidence wavered. But deep inside, she knew the truth. She had proof. That night, while he slept, she began documenting everything, printing emails, photographing receipts, even recording conversations where his tone betrayed his guilt. She stored them in a folder hidden away from his reach. The betrayal had changed something in her. She was no longer the quiet, trusting wife. She was a woman who had seen her world collapse in a single discovery, and she was determined not to let his lies bury her. The days leading up to her disappearance carried a heaviness that those closest to her would later recall with unsettling clarity. Friends noticed how her voice had changed, still soft, but edged with exhaustion and something sharper, a quiet desperation. She confided in her best friend one evening over the phone, her words broken by pauses. "He's lying to me," she whispered. "I know he is. And if he's capable of lying like this, what else is he capable of?" She didn't cry, she sounded resolute, almost as if she were preparing herself for a battle she knew she might not survive. At home, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Staff spoke in hushed tones about arguments echoing through the marble halls. One of the maids remembered seeing her sitting in the nursery, staring at the crib as though weighing a future that no longer seemed certain. Her diary, discovered later by investigators, revealed haunting lines scribbled in uneven handwriting. "He thinks I don't know. But I do. If anything happens to me, someone must tell the truth." The pages carried anger, but also fear, a gnawing dread she couldn't quite shake. Her health began to show the toll of the stress. Sleepless nights left dark circles beneath her eyes. Meals went untouched. Friends urged her to rest, to focus on the baby, but she brushed them off, saying, "How can I rest when everything I believed in has been a lie?" Her once luminous smile faded into something brittle. The glow of pregnancy was dimmed by suspicion and betrayal. She became meticulous in her precautions. She made copies of the evidence she had collected, emails, receipts, and recordings, sealing them in an envelope she handed to a trusted friend with the chilling words, "Hold on to this, just in case." Her instincts screamed that the walls around her were closing in, and she refused to be silenced without leaving a trail behind. Neighbors noticed her pacing outside the mansion in the evenings, one hand protectively resting on her stomach. She appeared restless, glancing back at the house as though it were no longer a sanctuary but a cage. On one such evening, a neighbor saw her pause at the gate, as if contemplating walking out and never looking back, before reluctantly returning inside. The last person to speak with her in those final days was her best friend. That phone call would haunt the woman forever. Her voice was low, strained, but steady. "If something happens to me, don't trust him," she said. There was no laughter, no reassurance, only a heavy finality that made the friend's skin crawl. Those who saw her in those last hours all agreed on one thing. She looked like a woman standing on the edge of something irreversible. And within days, she would step over that edge and vanish, leaving behind only questions, suspicion, and an unborn child whose heartbeat was the only innocent rhythm in a house full of secrets. The night she vanished began like any other, but hindsight would later turn every detail into an omen. The sky was heavy with clouds, swallowing the moonlight, casting the mansion in uneasy shadow. Security cameras caught glimpses of her wandering the garden just after dusk, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other wrapped tightly around her robe. She looked restless, pacing back and forth along the gravel path, pausing at times to tilt her head toward the house as if debating whether to step inside at all. Inside, tensions boiled. Neighbors later reported hearing shouting through the thick stone walls, muffled but unmistakable. The man's voice was sharp, commanding, punctuated by the slam of a door that reverberated through the quiet street. One neighbor claimed she thought she heard the woman's voice rise in reply, though softer, pleading before it fell silent. The quarrel, whatever its cause, ended abruptly. From that moment, not a sound escaped the mansion's walls. CCTV footage provided the last haunting images of her. At around 11 that night, she was seen standing at the edge of the garden, staring out into the dark street beyond the iron gates. She lingered there, clutching her belly as though grounding herself in the only thing she could trust, the child inside her. Then she turned back and disappeared into the house. The cameras never caught her again. By morning, she was gone. Her bed had not been slept in. Her shoes remained neatly lined up by the door. Her handbag, phone, and identification, all untouched in the bedroom. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace of departure. The husband waited until nearly noon before calling the police, his voice calm, almost rehearsed, as he reported her missing. He told them she had seemed emotional lately, that perhaps she had wandered off on her own. His lack of urgency unsettled those who heard the recording of the call later. Police arrived quickly, scouring the mansion and the surrounding grounds. Dogs were brought in to track her scent, but the trail ended abruptly near the back entrance of the property, as though she had simply ceased to exist. Detectives pressed the husband for details, but his answers were vague. He claimed he had gone to bed early and assumed she was asleep in another room. He had not noticed her absence until hours later. Speculation ignited instantly. Media descended on the street, their cameras capturing the iron gates and manicured lawns that now stood as silent witnesses to her disappearance. Reporters whispered about the arguments, about the cracks in the perfect marriage, about the mysterious business trips. Was she a runaway wife, broken by betrayal, or the victim of something more sinister? The haunting question spread like wildfire. How does a pregnant woman, in her final months, leave without shoes, without money, without a word? The answer remained hidden within the walls of the mansion, cloaked in silence, while the city held its breath, waiting for the truth to surface. Detectives began their work with methodical precision, retracing every moment of her final hours. The mansion, once a symbol of opulence, was transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off its gleaming gates, while officers combed through the manicured gardens and pristine halls. Nothing appeared disturbed at first glance, no broken locks, no signs of forced entry. Yet the absence of struggle was, in itself, suspicious. A heavily pregnant woman does not simply vanish quietly into the night. The husband's demeanor immediately drew attention. He was polished, composed, almost too calm. Sitting across from investigators, he spoke of his wife's fragile emotional state, implying that she had grown paranoid during her pregnancy. He suggested she might have left of her own accord, perhaps overwhelmed by stress. But his account was riddled with inconsistencies. When pressed about the night of her disappearance, he contradicted himself, first saying he had gone to bed at 10, then later insisting it was closer to midnight. His lack of concern struck even the most seasoned officers as unsettling. Forensic teams uncovered troubling details. In the guest room, beneath an expensive Persian rug, traces of blood were discovered. Too small to be visible to the naked eye, but enough for testing. When questioned, the husband brushed it off as a nosebleed from a visiting relative months earlier. Investigators weren't convinced. The samples were rushed to the lab, their results anxiously awaited. Attention soon turned to the husband's so-called business trip. Airline records revealed no bookings under his name, despite his claims of upcoming meetings. Instead, detectives uncovered reservations at a luxury resort registered under an alias frequently used by him. Surveillance footage from the resort showed him accompanied by a glamorous young woman, laughing and embracing in plain view. The assistant, whom he had previously dismissed as a rumor, was now undeniable. The mistress was brought in for questioning. Nervous and defensive, she insisted she had nothing to do with the wife's disappearance. She claimed the millionaire had told her the marriage was over, that his wife was unstable, and that he was planning to start fresh. When confronted with evidence of her presence on the so-called business trip, she broke down, but denied any knowledge of foul play. Meanwhile, the media frenzy intensified. Headlines screamed across front pages: "Millionaire's wife missing, husband questioned." Talk shows speculated endlessly. Was this a tragic case of a runaway woman, or had wealth and power been used to cover up a crime? The public devoured every rumor, dissecting every shred of gossip. Detectives, however, remained focused. Phone records showed late-night calls between the husband and mistress days before the disappearance, their content cryptic but suggestive of planning. Security logs from the mansion revealed disabled cameras for a 2-hour window the night she vanished, a detail the husband could not explain. The investigation, once thought to be straightforward, had become a tangled web of lies, betrayal, and deceit. And at the center of it all was a man who seemed untouchable, his fortune shielding him like armor. But as the pieces began to fit together, one truth grew harder to ignore: the disappearance of his wife was no accident. The deeper investigators dug into the millionaire's life, the more the carefully crafted facade began to crumble. To the world, he was a self-made mogul, a visionary who built an empire from scratch. But behind closed doors, his empire was riddled with shadows. Financial records revealed offshore accounts hidden under layers of shell companies, funds quietly funneled out of the country. What looked like legitimate business dealings on the surface often led to dead ends, companies that didn't exist, or addresses that belonged to empty warehouses. Former employees, emboldened by the growing scandal, came forward with stories of a man whose charm was nothing more than a mask. He was quick to anger, they said, lashing out at even the smallest mistakes. Staff recalled seeing bruises on his wife's arms during dinner parties, though she always brushed off their concern with nervous laughter. Some whispered that he controlled every aspect of her life, her social outings, her friendships, even her access to money. She had the appearance of freedom, but in truth, she lived inside an invisible cage. And then there were the women. The mistress who had surfaced was only one of many. Investigators unearthed hotel records spanning years, each linked to different companions, always concealed under aliases. The so-called business trips had long been a cover for indulgence and betrayal. For the first time, the image of the devoted husband began to rot under public scrutiny. Neighbors, too, admitted they had heard things: late-night shouting matches, glass shattering, doors slamming. One recalled seeing him throw something into the trunk of his car after midnight, only to drive off into the darkness and return hours later, alone. Until now, such observations had seemed unremarkable, easily dismissed as the quirks of a wealthy household. In hindsight, they painted a chilling portrait. The man who once dazzled society was revealed as a manipulator, a fraud, and potentially something much worse. With each new revelation, suspicion deepened. This was no grieving husband, no victim of circumstance. This was a man with secrets darker than anyone had imagined, secrets that might have swallowed his wife whole. As days stretched into weeks without a trace of her, theories multiplied like wildfire. The public, hungry for answers, clung to every possibility. One popular belief was that she had staged her own disappearance. Betrayed and humiliated, perhaps she had decided to punish her husband in the most dramatic way possible, vanishing, leaving him to face the scandal alone. Supporters of this theory pointed to her hidden preparations, the evidence she had collected, and her recent secrecy. Maybe she had slipped away under the cover of night, waiting for the perfect moment to reappear and expose him. But others dismissed the runaway idea as absurd. A woman in her final months of pregnancy, they argued, would never choose to disappear voluntarily, especially without clothes, money, or essentials. Her family insisted she adored her unborn child, that she would never abandon the baby. That led to the darker theory: her husband had silenced her. Perhaps she had threatened to reveal his affairs or his shady financial dealings, and he decided that eliminating her was the only way to protect his empire. The traces of blood, the disabled cameras, the late-night arguments, all pointed in this chilling direction. Some speculated about the mistress's involvement. Could jealousy have turned violent? Was she manipulated into helping cover up the disappearance, or was she just another pawn in the millionaire's twisted game? Others floated more outlandish ideas: kidnapping, human trafficking, even the possibility of a staged abduction designed to divert attention from his crimes. In the end, none of the theories could be confirmed. What remained was a haunting divide: had she walked away, or had she been taken from the world against her will? The truth hovered like a storm cloud, heavy and unresolved, leaving everyone to wonder which version of events would one day be proven true. Despite weeks of searching, the investigation yielded no body, no definitive proof, only fragments of a story that refused to fit neatly together. The mansion's gates reopened, the millionaire resuming his life as though tragedy had brushed past him rather than torn through it. He appeared at public events again, his mistress by his side, smiling for cameras that now viewed him with suspicion instead of admiration. The whispers never stopped, but without hard evidence, the law's grip slipped. Her friends and family refused to give up. They organized vigils, plastered her face across missing person posters, and demanded justice. Each candle lit in her memory was also a protest against the silence that surrounded her disappearance. For them, she wasn't just another headline: she was a daughter, a friend, a mother-to-be whose story had been stolen. Yet the question lingered, heavy and unanswered: had she chosen to escape, or had she been erased? With no closure, the truth remained a shadow, lurking behind every rumor, every suspicious glance, every hollow smile from the man who claimed to love her. One fact remained undeniable: secrets buried in darkness rarely stay hidden forever. And one day, the truth would come knocking.